Hey, I'm Bacon. Standard hit points suck. Every system in a game should facilitate the core competency of that game. If it's a story game, it's narrative. If it's a role-playing game, it's the role-playing. Hit points, in the way they're implemented in the vast majority of cases, do not do this. If you're playing a story game where the collaborative narrative is the focus, having to stop to figure out damage is counterintuitive to the storytelling process. You are instantly taken out of the moment in the story to do some arbitrary accounting. The same is true for role-playing. Having to stop to do math is going to immediately break your immersion and take you out of the headspace of your character. It forces you to do the opposite of role-playing. But this isn't just about the math with hit points. I know there is math contained in a wide variety of systems when you're role-playing. It's about the actual application of the system and how it's not really fit for purpose. Standard hit point implementation doesn't usually impact your performance at all unless you lose your last hit point when either you die or begin rolling for your life. Your last hit point's the only one that matters because it's the only one that impacts the game in any way whatsoever. Otherwise, it's just an inconsequential resource to be spent in combat. Which means that hit points also fail directly in their primary purpose, which is to believably track survivability. How many hits can you take before you die? Can you keep going from one fight to the next to the next? This depends on the system, but typically as long as you have your last hit point left, you can continue to fight on without consequence or even impact to your functionality. It might affect you psychologically and keep you from acting recklessly, but as long as luck and the dice are on your side, you can go forever. No fatigue, no threat of mechanical impact due to injury. But it can also affect you psychologically in the opposite direction, which is bad for role-playing. Brave characters won't be brave because they know the dangers and step to the challenge anyway. They're falsely brave because they think they won't die when they enter combat because they have 97 hit points and can take what would amount to 7 killing blows, or the system more realistic or even just more abstract. In real life, you can die at the end of a 2-inch blade in less than 3 seconds if your adversary is inside 20 feet from you. But if you're level 12 with a hit point pool of 83, you'll be able to take what would amount to lethal blow after lethal blow after lethal blow and keep going as long as your last hit point has been spared. When you get injured badly enough in real life, it immediately becomes your singular concern. If you were to get shot, you're dead. So hanging on to your last hit point while being able to swing a sword flat out to do maximum damage without penalty from injury ad infinitum does not provide a realistic lived experience, which is the specific goal of role-playing. Therefore, hit points don't cut it. I understand that a measure of abstraction is necessary in order to make things work at the table, but hit points aren't actually an abstraction. It's the opposite. It's adding a layer of hyper-specificity used to draw out fights and make them less lethal, less brutal, and less life-threatening. In a superhero game or a game of vampire, this is not a bad thing. But in most games where you're just a dude on a quest, it is, I would argue, in direct opposition to the goal of the activity. Thank goodness, standard hit points aren't the only systems that we have access to. And I'm going to go over a couple of them right now. So, in Streets of Peril, they make a simple switch. They switch from hit points to grit points, which are an abstract measurement of the combatant's durability. It can represent actual physical injury, but also psychological stress or waning luck. And just adding that simple word switch from hit to grit and allowing for that much ambiguity in the system does a lot to sort of encourage you to stay in that headspace because you're not worried about your physical condition or just there's just something about it, at least in my experience, where when you make that switch, there's something that happens in the way that I think about the game that allows it to flow more reasonably, more like what I would be looking for out of a role-playing game. Now, obviously, you're still doing the arbitrary accounting if it is in a derived hit point system with high health pools. So it's not really a great solution, but it is absolutely a step in the right direction. So from here, we can go to Cyberpunk Red, which uses hit point thresholds. So hit points are still a derived statistic, and you still have to do that arbitrary accounting for the damage. However, it makes it a little bit more real because as your hit points decrease and you cross over these thresholds that are in these columns, you will begin to suffer negative effects. There's just less than full health where nothing happens. There's less than half health, where you get a -2 to all actions. Then there's less than 1 hit point, which gives you just an absolute litany of negatives that take place, and you must make death saves at the start of every one of your turn, and then you die if you have 0 health and also fail a death save. So this is a little bit better in being more realistic. It also adds a bunch of different types of accounting because now you're worried about all the negatives that you're taking, et cetera, et cetera. However, for a hit point system, which is the main topic of the video, it is again another step in the right direction. Injury is more lasting. There's more of an impact in the middle of combat if you take enough damage, and so I feel like this is definitely we're headed again in the right direction. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you can take injuries against a... Okay, let me just start over. So wounds are lost by sustaining damage, so you're still doing that arbitrary accounting. However, health pools or wound pools in this game usually end up being very low. It's not uncommon for you to have less than 10 wounds. And when you go down below 0 wounds, you begin to take what they call critical wounds. So your wound count is getting banged up, bruised, maybe concussed a little bit while you're in combat. But once your health goes down, and it goes down very swiftly because people they're you're going to get hit by a truck. You'll get creamed. The game is very famous for being very lethal. So when you get creamed, any of those wounds that spill over into the negatives, like after you cross that 0 threshold, you begin to take critical wounds for. That can become permanent, that do take time to heal. And if you take more wounds than a particular derived stat, your toughness bonus, I think it is, then you just outright die when you take that many critical wounds. Also, when you're, there are prone conditions that you can gain. There are unconscious conditions you can gain, in which case enemy combatants can just kill you outright. It's a very, very lethal system. And it's also, again, another step in that correct direction. So instead of being abstract like Cyberpunk Red is with hit point thresholds, when someone swings at you in this game, there is a particular body part that they will hit. Now, the individual body parts do not have their own hit point pools. The hit points are still taken away from your main wound pool. I should stop interchanging terms. So in this game, it's wounds. But when they make the roll, there's a mechanic that's used because it's a percent die roll. There's a mechanic used to determine what body part they're swinging against. And if you go down below your wound, your that 0 threshold, then those critical wounds are going to start occurring on the body parts that are rolled for. So it's a central wound pool, but the body parts are selected by a mechanic, a random mechanic in the rolling. So it tells you where those critical wounds are applied. Moving on to Mithras, or also RuneQuest, I think, does it the same way. You do get hit point pools in this game, but again, they're lower hit point pools. And in this table, you'll see your hit points per location are assigned based on your Constitution score and your size. So you add these two together. I'm not going to get into math. This is a hit point video. Maybe I'll get into the math in a later video. But let's say I have somewhere between 16 and 20. So my legs have 4 hit points each. My abdomen has 5. My chest has 6. Each arm has 3, and my head has 4. So from there, you will determine where you're hit. But then, unlike Warhammer, where you have that central health pool, in this game you have each individual body part with its own health pool. And so the injuries that you incur on these different body parts is dependent upon reaching 0 on these body parts and not reaching 0 altogether. So you can still suffer permanent injury. And you can see over here, I believe it was 172. Maybe not. Well, I don't know where that page is. You know what? We're just gonna do this. We're just gonna scuff it a bit. Go find where wounds are. Oh, you know what? I think it's 81. Yep, here we go. So you can see here how long it takes to heal from minor wounds, serious wounds, major wounds is days, weeks, months. You can see over here there's a permanent injury table. It depends on the limb that's being damaged. And so this one gives you low hit point pools, which is absolutely a step in the right direction because the accounting is backed off of when you're not dealing with 97 hit points, and also accounts for permanent injury in the middle of combat or even temporary injury. It also gives you different health pools per limb, which I think is fantastic. And of all of these systems that we've reviewed so far, this would be my preferred system. Going back to Warhammer Fantasy for a bit, there are also what's called fate points. So fate points are given to you at the beginning of the game. You get a very low count of them. I think humans can maybe have a maximum of 5. Everyone else, I think, might get a maximum of like 2 or 3. I have to go and read the rules. And one of the things you can do with a fate point is prevent yourself from dying, which is a really good way to mitigate how brutal the game is. So you're still taking on all these injuries, and at the moment that you would die, you can just spend a fate point and not die. Now, you still have to deal with all of your injuries. You still have to make sure that they're healed, otherwise you won't be able to use your arm or whatever it is. There's magical healing options, there's mundane healing options, but that fate point is a really good way to make combat more realistic and have a less of a detrimental impact to the player. Because unless you're playing that kind of game where you just expect to die, like Alien or Call of Cthulhu, it can be a hindrance to the role-playing experience to just die in session 1. It's just not conducive to role-playing. So being able to sort of, save your character a couple of times ends up being a really great way, less realistic, but a really great way to sort of mitigate that issue. Mithras doesn't allow for those fate points, but I think because the hit point pools are individual on the limbs, that's the mitigating factor. You can have, you can get a whole arm hacked off and still continue on with your quest. You'll just have to deal with that permanent wound. And then finally, we'll go to Easy D6, which is the most abstracted hit point method that I've experienced. I haven't experienced everything out there. If you have experienced something that's more abstract or that you prefer, throw it down in the comments. I'd love to read how other people and other systems have solved this problem. But Easy D6 is a really simple 3 strikes and you're out. So each hit against you is a strike, and once you get to 3, that's it. You're done. So some attacks, some magic attacks and critical attacks can deal more than 1 strike at a time, but this communicates exactly how dangerous combat is. And because you're dealing with an abstract strike idea, you don't really have to exit your headspace. You don't have to exit the headspace of the character to figure this out. It's a really low number, so the accounting is very, very limited, and it's a very easy to understand, very smooth way to solve the problem. So this one ends up being my favorite overall, except for the fact that it doesn't really do injury. So you only have 3 strikes, but as long as you have that last strike, you can still swing flat out. So if I were to develop a hit point system, I think it would involve a similar idea, so a similar idea to 3 strikes, but then also each strike would likely incorporate some sort of threshold or some sort of injury that you roll on a table. And I think that would likely be the most realistic, but the most role play effective hit point accounting method. On top of that, because 3 strikes it's very brutal, I would likely also then incorporate some method of fate point, like in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, so that you could prevent yourself from dying a couple times before you had to roll a new character up. But that, to me, and I'm sure you can tell, I prefer a brutal, more realistic style of roleplay. That, to me, would probably be the sweet spot of hit point accounting. It's one that you don't have to think a lot about to do a bunch of math to take you out of the headspace of your character. It's one that does account for real world injury. So let's say, strike one, you roll a percent die on a table. Maybe nothing happens, right? Maybe you just get the strike against you. It's a wound. It's something that you're going to have to deal with because now you only have 2 strikes, but it's not going to take you out in any sort of detrimental way. Maybe you roll and it's, your toe got cut off, or maybe it kills you outright. Maybe since we're rolling percentiles, maybe you roll 100 and that's it. You just get on strike one, you just get boom, you're dead. But I probably not. And this is me just spitballing because, like, if 3 strikes and you're out, it feels weird to get 1 strike and have that chance of death. So it'd likely be 3 separate tables. You'd have your first strike table, your second strike table, and then third strike you would be dead unless you decided to save with a fate point, in which case we could roll on that table. But I haven't actually sat down and drawn this method out. Maybe that's something I'll do. Maybe that's a topic for another video. We'll revisit hit points and I'll figure out a system that I prefer that would work well for the way that I like to role play that I have developed. So this isn't really if you think I'm wrong, tell me why kind of a situation. It's if you have a preferred way of accounting for hit points, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you prefer the standard method of hit point accounting, let me know why. If you have another method of hit point accounting that you prefer, let me know. I love to explore game systems, especially game systems that I tend to dislike in the majority of games, because I want to know what else is out there. So I don't know how to end this video. I'm just going to say bye. Bye.